Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to my conversation today with Professor Daniel Traça, Dean of Nova School of Business and Economics. I'm very pleased to welcome you today, Daniel, to your own university, obviously.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be here.
So, you're the Dean of a university and you're a Professor of Economics. Can you tell us a little bit about the career that has brought you here to date? What has happened and how has it evolved?
Sure. Okay, Aoife, thank you. The question was, for those that didn't hear before, Aoife was asking me about all the way that got me here to this school. And I won't go through too many details, but I'll tell you, the interesting fact is that I was actually a student here. I graduated from here in 1991, quite a bit of time ago. Not from this campus, from Nova, but from another campus that was downtown Lisbon. And then I spent about 5 years in New York City to study. I studied at Columbia University for my PhD. I spent 5 years in New York City. And then I had about 4 years that I was in France. I was at INSEAD, at a business school in Fontainebleau. I was teaching there for about 4 years. So I spent 4 years in Fontainebleau teaching in France. Then I went to Singapore, and I spent 4 years in Singapore between 2000 and 2004. It was quite exciting because it was just after the East Asian crisis, so there was the hangover from that crisis. So it was a remarkable experience of discovering Asia. Then I came back to Europe in 2004. I was at Solvay Business School, which is a business school in Brussels. So I spent 4 years in Brussels, and that brought me to 2008. And in 2009, it was time to come back home, to try to come back to close to where the family was. And my alma mater, the school was looking for someone with my profile, and I decided to come back. And so this has been about 12 years that I've been here, and it's been very exciting. The school has grown a lot over the last 12 years. Just to give you a sense, we had 109 master students when I arrived in 2009, and this year we've welcomed over 1,200 master students, of which 56% of them are actually foreigners. 30% of our students arriving this year were actually coming from Germany. So we've been able to internationalize the school, to make it grow. We've created this campus, which if your viewers haven't seen it, I'd like to invite them to come and see it because it's a great campus. And we are really starting to rethink what a business school, what a university should look like towards the future, starting from this campus. So it's been a wonderful experience. I've had the opportunity of traveling. And I've had the opportunity of trying to make some difference back in my country when having come back.
And has much of your experience been in the educational sector, or have you done quite a bit of private sector or enterprise work at all in your career history?
Most of my experience has been on the educational sector. I trained as a PhD, and then I was a professor for quite a while. And then I discovered that I like to manage schools. I discovered this when I was in Belgium. I discovered I like to manage school, I like to manage programs, I like to manage programs towards the students. I love students and I love the interaction with students. And so I slowly moved from a traditional professorial career, which is focused on research and just teaching, to a more managerial career in academia, but remaining with this link to students, which was something that actually has gone with me through my life.
And they say that economics is the the study of human behaviour. And obviously there are quite a number of famous economists that have set theories throughout history. Is there any particular theory that you subscribe to, or do you make up your own?
I tend to make up my own. I think that actually economics as a science has for a while been a little bit too far away from human beings, from who we really are. I think economics has idealized human beings as these very rational, very mathematical beings, which I don't think we actually are as individuals. And so I think as a science, economics has missed out on a lot of the emotional elements that drive human beings and that affect their behavior in society. And so I think that we need to actually, as we look at society in general, as an economist, we have to be an economist, we have to be a political scientist, we have to be a psychologist, we have to be a neurologist, and we have to bring it all together to understand society and economic facts the same way we understand political facts, the same way we understand group behavior facts. And so I think economics needs to rethink itself a little bit to come closer to what human beings really are in order to understand them in a better way. There is one economist I really appreciate. I mean, older economists tend to be better from my perspective. The classical economists. I mean, even Adam Smith, for example, which we tend to think of him as always this defense of free markets. If you read the stuff that he writes on human beings, about communities, about how communities are probably as important as markets when you organize human societies. So I tend to like a more pragmatic, a more holistic approach to understanding societies more than a technical approach based on pure economic science.
And how have you brought those beliefs in communities and the larger picture to the development work that you've said here in Nova? I mean, you've said it's grown an astonishing amount in the last 8 years. Have you focused very much on working from the community level up, or have you gone the top-down level with directing it from the top and saying, this is what we're going to do?
No, I think in the end, it's always halfway that you have to do this. And my experience here has taught me two things. First, you cannot be too grassroots oriented, otherwise you don't get stuff done quickly. And we've grown a lot. We've grown a lot because we have set up strategies and we've followed up on them. But at the same time, that strategy cannot be dissociated away from the feeling of community and the feeling of purpose that individuals that are part of your community feel. What I'm saying is, you point the way, and I think this is the way organizations have to transform themselves toward. You understand the market. You listen to everybody. You do point the way, but you have to point that way always in a sense that people that stay with you in your community need to feel that they share something, and it's very important for you to feel. So, what are your values? What values does your community share? Do they stay with you on this? Do they follow you on this? Okay, and values is very important, and purpose goes along with it. Which is, so what is our mission? When we as an organization, as a company, or as a business school, when we write down our mission, how much time do we spend thinking about how it actually makes other people feel that they want to be with you on that mission? And so I think that the bottom-up and the top-down approach to these things, in the end, in today's organizations, I think in the past was different. I think in the past it was much more top-down. I mean, you directed and people would just follow you. I think nowadays when people need to really are seeking and need to find that sense of purpose in the things they do, in the things they spend their time in, you need to basically set up a purpose for your organization. And that has to be, I wouldn't say top-down, you need to listen to everybody, but there is some direction that needs to be set. At the same time, everybody needs to feel that this is a platform they want to be part of. And so in a sense, when you think of, you mentioned the growth that we've had, and if you ask us what has allowed us to get here, when you try to bring together this top-down, bottom-up approach, I call it a little bit of managed chaos. Because in the end, when you have all these people that need to feel empowered and feeling that sense of purpose, you need to give them space. You need to give them space to be free. You need to give them space to pursue their own objectives, to feel that in the end, staying in the school is part of their own objectives. So when you set up these goals, you need to understand that people will follow you because they believe this is also part of their own purpose, but this means you have to give them freedom to do things that they find meaningful. Mm-hmm. And so this has been the challenge of, and I do believe that the future of organizations is going to be very much like this, and that leadership in the future is going to be a lot about creating organizations that are platforms. I come to this organization not because I want to get my salary paid and go home, but I come to this organization because I want to develop my own personal journey here, right? And so you need to create that space, and creating that space means you need to give your people more power than you feel comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, you haven't given them enough power. And that's creating a little bit of chaos, but it has to be managed. Mm-hmm. And that's the trade-off that you do in this organization.
So in a university setting, how do you devolve that power out to the people? Because obviously, at the end of the day, there has to be a fairly structured approach to your master's, to your PhD, to any research work you're doing. So how do you actually then empower people while also saying, here are the boundaries and here are the guidelines?
Good point. So one element is to get rid of, for example, we were just talking about this before we actually went online. You were asking me how should I be treated, right? And one thing I said when I arrived is, everybody has to be on a first name basis. For Portuguese culture, this is very different. Everybody here has whatever you have, you always put the degree before your name. So I said, you have to get rid of it. We need to create an organization that's much freer, where people just feel that we're all equal in the things that we want to share. So this is one part. It's just creating an organization where communication is very easy, very fluid, allowing every person to have access to whomever is in the organization. Okay? Creating very flat organizations, I think, is one point of it. The second point is the point of purpose. I think we need to constantly communicate to people that what they're doing is important, and what we collectively do is important for the world. And so why we exist, other than just taking income home, why we exist, why we wake up, why we come here to work, it's very important to always get people motivated through that. And the third thing is to always challenge them to innovate. Always ask them, how would you solve this problem? Always give them the extra mile of, even if you don't think they're going to make it right, give them the space to fail so that they feel that it's their own failure and they can learn from it and move forward. And so I think it's about that treating each human being in your organization not as someone who's there to follow your commands, but treating someone who's there to fulfill their own destiny, and giving them the space to fulfill and feeling that they are doing this. And I think that's, I really think that's the way humanity needs to evolve, and that's the way organization needs to evolve. For the future.
And as you think about that and the ethos that you're trying to instill here, how do you measure that up against the competitiveness that exists in the university or the academic world? Because competition...
The competitiveness amongst ourselves.
Yeah, because competition often stifles the very things that you're talking about here, which is purpose and growth and freedom to experiment and fail.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and my sense is, through that sense of purpose and through the sense of our collective, not just individual purpose, but that your individual purpose fits into a collective purpose, we've been able to create an organization where we have it's a great place to work. People that come here feel very joyful of working here, even though we work very, very, very hard. I mean, we're a public university, but everybody here just does an extra mile to get things done. If we need people to come here on a Saturday, they will. If we need people to come here on a Sunday, they will, because they feel that it's part of their mission. And so I think once you create an organization where people feel there's a collective sense of purpose, and you cultivate that collective sense of purpose, some of that competitiveness goes away. So of course it's very important not to have rewarding systems that put, it's the number one that gets this reward, is the number two that's no rewards. You cannot have those reward systems. You cannot have an organization that is a collective sense of purpose if you have those kinds of systems where you feel like you're always trying to outcompete the guy next to you. You can't have that, right? And so, I think we've been able in this school, through these, or maybe it's just the general culture of the school, never to have that sense of peer-to-peer competition that basically just means that I want to get ahead of you or anybody else. But the other thing is, I think the fact that we've grown so much, and that we're so focused on growth and on innovation towards growth, means that the space is always increasing. So I'm never trying to outcompete someone else for space, because growth means that space for everybody to grow, right? So if the school is growing, I can actually get promoted, and there's space for anyone else to get promoted. And so I think that's a little bit the context that we're trying to create here. And so far it's been working.
So, as if you were to sum up the ethos of Nova School of Business and Economics, what would it be?
I think it's about each one finding, I think the word purpose for me is very, very important. And so I think it's about each one finding their sense of purpose in this organization and building that into a collective desire to create impact in the world. And so whenever I tell back to people why it is that they are with us, I always tell the stories of the impact that the school is creating. The fact that our students are satisfied, that they get great careers, that in those great careers they actually do great things for the world, that our faculty publishes top research that is recognized worldwide, that in the end, that students that are here, not just about the general output, but that students that come here feel tremendously happy and joyful with the engagement they have with the faculty, with the staff, with the entire community. And so it's this sense of, and in the end, isn't that what human beings are about? I really think this is what we as human beings are seeking for. We try to hide it with sort of other kinds of things, but in the end, if we find that place where we feel home, even when you're not at home, when you're in your job, and when you feel not only that you're at home, that you're with people that you want to work with, but that the world is changing because of what you're doing, I think this is the recognition that we're all looking for. So I'm not sure that we're all looking for that, but I know that the people that are working here are looking for that.
Mm-hmm. And overall in Portugal, you know, the Irish, and I'm speaking obviously as an Irish person, are obsessed with education. It's a really, really important feature of people's lives. I mean, people talk about schools, where you're going to go, where you're going to go to college, what are you going to move on to. Do you see that the same way in Portugal? And if so, has it changed over the last few years?
I think the focus on education, that, as I said, you saw it in Ireland. It's something that has happened in Portugal, and it has happened in Portugal, I say, at the end of the 90s. The government spent quite a bit of money trying to support the educational system. Universities got created. Many of them are very, very high quality. Given the level of the country stands very well. Our education system is very good in terms of the success it gets in PISA scores and so on and so forth. So there was a strong effort by the government to create the universities, and now the culture is of a democratization of the university, and I actually had the numbers. I didn't have the numbers, but you know the numbers are staggering. As for example, the share of population that had college education, let's say 20 years ago, and the share of a population that has college education now. So that's something that is now ingrained in the Portuguese culture. Education is very important. This is something that began in the 1990s and has come and has allowed us to move a lot if you look at numbers of people going to college and people graduating from college. What is quite an interesting question is why, unlike Ireland, all that increase in the educational level of the population has not translated into dramatic economic growth. This is the interesting question. Portugal is a country where if you look at educational attainment, you will have seen tremendous progress. You don't see that progress in growth, you don't see that progress in productivity. And that is actually an interesting question to ask about what is lacking. And so, in particular vis-a-vis Ireland, where you've had that growth in productivity, where you've had that growth, that economic growth, why is it that it's lagging that link between education and growth that you've been able to find in Ireland? And maybe you have your own ideas on what is the part of that success. And this is something that I think Portugal would have a lot to learn from Ireland in terms of what do you need to actually what are the critical blocks to get economic growth and productivity up?
Yeah, I mean, Ireland's history was, you know, as you know, when we came out of the Second World War, you know, our economy, 50s Ireland was a grim place. It was a really, really grim place. And I think people were encouraged to go into education as a means of escaping, that if you could escape, and quite a lot of people were expected to leave Ireland and go overseas. And if you had an education, you were employable. And I think that was the ethos behind, you know, the fundamental need for everyone to have some education. Free education up to primary school was introduced in the 1920s. It became in the 1940s, 50s for free secondary education up to the middle of school, and then eventually everybody had a free education for their full first primary and secondary school education. College, admittedly, up until the 80s and 80s in particular, was for the wealthy and the elite. Only those who could afford to pay college fees could send them. But then it became much more egalitarian in the 80s, and people were expected to get degrees, and then they left Ireland and they travelled around the world. But there was always room then for people to go into the education system.
So actually, it's quite interesting that so in a sense, the history is very similar, and you take the 80s and the 90s when college becomes a democratic factor. But you know, for example, when in Portugal, when you've had people graduating and leaving, so for a long time you had lots of people that were graduating. What you find is that some people that were graduating and were moving into the civil service. So the public sector basically brought in a large part of people that were graduating from college. And so when the crisis came in 2011, actually, so because of that, we created a very bloated public sector. When that led us to the crisis in 2011, basically the public sector stopped recruiting people, and so people started leaving. And what is quite interesting is that the Portuguese ethos on that people that actually had to leave because of that challenge was one of, it's a disaster and this is the worst thing that can happen to the country. And people leaving, educated people leaving the country, is one of the worst things that could have happened. And I find it quite astonishing because my own story is one of someone who's gone. And who I learned lots of things when I was away. I made lots of networks when I was away. And all those have been very important for me coming back to Portugal and helping do whatever I do. And so it's quite interesting about the Irish attitude towards people sort of leaving and then coming back, and the difference between that and the Portuguese attitude, and how much that may have contributed to your actual success a few years later.
Well, I mean, there was certainly a huge element of angst about the so-called brain drain. Like, there really was quite a lot of discussion about how our brightest and our best were leaving the country. But as you've just mentioned, the idea was that I think for many of those people, they left and they got experience, and the type of experiences they could never have in Ireland. I graduated in '92, a year after you, and I graduated in engineering, and I think 60% of my class in 1992 emigrated.
That's amazing.
It was huge. A huge volume of them went to places like Japan, the US, and the UK. And an awful lot of those people came back within 8-10 years, and they brought with them knowledge and experience of places that they would not have had otherwise. And they brought that to Ireland, and they brought connections and networks and people that they knew who could then invest in Ireland also. So the brain drain kind of reversed in one sense. Yes, there is some element of it, but then we are living in a global world where people are expected to travel and to have different experiences. And in fact, that's the point of many, many business and master's degrees, is that you get experience overseas.
I mean, actually, that's one story that I mentioned quite very, very often, because again, India is an interesting country. We haven't gone through exactly the same. Lots of Indians left, and then when India started reforming, they actually came back, and were very important for what you're finding as success in India nowadays. But you've never had this amount of exiting in Portugal. But I think it would be quite interesting to understand that when Portugal puts in place the kinds of conditions where these people are going to feel like, I want to come back, the potential they have to bring back networks, knowledge, expertise to the country is quite interesting. So I think it's one part of the Irish story that will actually be quite interesting for the Portuguese to find out about, and actually rethink some of their priors when they actually look at phenomena like the brain drain, for example.
Yeah, well, when you look at something like the Ireland-Portugal Business Network, we are funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs, which realises that diaspora networks have a very, very strong impetus for business growth and business opportunities out in the wider world. And, Enterprise Ireland, which does export growth for Indigenous Irish producers, very much works with diaspora networks to try and help generate overseas opportunity for Indigenous Irish businesses. And Enterprise Ireland is, I think, the second largest fund manager in the world. So it's impressive, its growth, but it has relied a lot on networks overseas in order to generate that growth, Yeah,
that's actually another element that I think is quite interesting to share from Ireland, and where Portugal has quite a bit to learn from, because the role that having strong development agencies, the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, and the role that they have played in sort of setting up long-term strategies, and not just setting up those strategies. Right now, I don't know how many of your viewers are paying attention, but there's a big debate. Finally, Portugal has had a strategy that has been written. A professor has been asked to actually write a strategy for the country. That strategy is about 140 pages long, and it highlights some of the key roads that the country should take. But the problem is, if you think about implementing it, being accountable for it, making sure that it gets implemented beyond the political cycle where a government is there for 4 years and someone else comes afterwards. We have no structure to implement a strategy like this. So we have a great strategy written in paper, but no ability to actually roll it out. And on top of it, we have the resources coming now from the EU on the new funds, but no structure to actually roll it out to monitor its implementation, to make sure that it leverages the right resources, to report on it, to be accountable, we have no structure to do it. So it'd be quite interesting also, another learning point, in addition to the brain drain and the reverse brain drain that you create, is this ability of creating these agencies that are, and how they relate to the politics, to allow the countries to actually implement strategies that are transformational over a space of 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. Well, obviously, with anything, if you're given a very, very specific focus, people can work really well to that focus. So in our case, I know that ICEP are a blended of, inward and outward investment, whereas the IDA was very much given you're the Industrial Development Authority, your job is to bring in investment into Ireland. Enterprise Ireland, your job is to look after overseas, our indigenous businesses within the country, but also exporting. Board BIA was obviously given the role of promoting Irish food overseas. Tourism Ireland was given the job of promoting Irish tourism overseas. So that focus allows people to really specialise in what they do and to get the right expertise and the right people in the right jobs. Yeah. To make it work.
This is something that in Portugal is always, so we're talking about, two dimensions where there's so much that Portugal has to learn from Ireland. Basically, for example, the role of the IDA and Enterprise Ireland and the other agencies, the way to deal with the brain drain, how to actually go around and getting all these foreign investment. And I actually mention Ireland a lot. I think one of the reasons why we actually started this relationship is because I mention Ireland a lot as an example. So I hope that, through the network being here, you can also start teaching the Portuguese something about how you actually get a miracle growing like what has happened in Ireland. But I also think that another dimension is that, there is so much potential right now in Portugal that I hope that we can also get Irish business people to find more interest in coming to Portugal and to coming to Nova eventually.
Well, hopefully. We moved here in 2015 and we absolutely love Portugal. We really do. Our son is in school here. I'd be surprised if he doesn't go to university here if he ever gets to grips with the language. But one of the things...
We teach everything in English, by the way.
Yeah, in Nova, do you?
Yeah, we do.
I'll tell him. But one of the things that struck me when we arrived here in 2015 was this idea that you had this really young, well-educated workforce. Everybody speaks English or a couple of other languages, and yet you were quite far behind where Ireland perceives itself to be at the time. And since then, I've noticed this huge change, certainly a very subtle change at youth level of looking further outwards, being more involved. And you're starting to see the results of that with now call centres and tech businesses. Portugal is definitely attracting a lot of inward investment into tech. Do you see that the same way, or are we looking at it from a slightly different perspective?
No, absolutely. And if you were here before, you would have noticed even a more striking difference. I think one thing that the crisis that we've went through in 2011 with the IMF coming in, had two big things that changed in Portugal. One is that the Portuguese realized that you cannot allow your budget balance to get out of control. And so you will see that governments have changed. They've moved from the right to the left, but they've all remained very, very committed to this notion that you cannot allow budget deficits to get out of control. Mm-hmm. So this was a first real thing that changed. And when I mean change, I think it changed throughout society. Mm-hmm. Throughout society. The second thing that changed in society is that we were a country not focused on exports. The ratio of exports to GDP in Portugal was, before the crisis, of around 28%. It's very low. We're talking about a country that's the same size as Ireland, more or less, and where Ireland is probably on the hundreds, over 100%. And for us, it was 28%. Over the few years after the crisis, so between 2000 and, let's say, 12 and 2016, it went up from 28% to 44, 50%. Right? So all of a sudden, the country is speaking the language of exports. All of a sudden, people are speaking the language of internationalization. They understand there is nothing the country can do unless it positions itself in the context of globalization and in the context of global trade. And this is very different. This is a sea of difference. And I think that the potential, and it opened a Pandora of opportunities. One opportunity, of course, was realizing that in that context of globalization, just the simple hospitality, the weather, what the country has to offer is tremendous. And so you've seen a dramatic surge in tourism. We've created this campus. If your viewers, again, I'd like to invite them to come and visit us. But we create this campus on the notion that you can create a tremendous school for foreigners to come study in Portugal by bringing together the quality of your studies and the lifestyle you can offer in Portugal. And we have nowadays, as I said, this year we had over 350 German students that arrive, just from Germany. We have many students coming from all over the world coming and arriving here. And this we've done over the last 4 years. Okay? So tourism has gone up. Education for foreign students has gone up. We have foreign students arriving in Lisbon all the time. We have other industries are considering themselves in terms of services like health, leveraging these notion that the hospitality, the weather, the lifestyle of Portugal are a key selling point. So again, one selling point was that we have the human resources and the infrastructure. Okay, you've highlighted it. One selling point was that we remain very committed to internationalization. One selling point is the fact that our hospitality and our lifestyle are clearly a plus. And finally, we open a language becomes very important. You mentioned that we speak several languages, but we also speak Portuguese. And the Portuguese-speaking market in the world is massive. So we can actually help companies coming from Ireland, for example, to enter markets in Africa, enter the Brazilian market. We have not just the language link, but also the cultural link and the doing business link. And so this idea of the hospitality of the country, plus the links to Portuguese-speaking countries, plus the ability of actually having a strong infrastructure with digital and all those kinds of links, and the people, I think, make Portugal. And one point I'd like to mention also is the political stability of the country. I think the country is not pivoting to far right, far left. We don't have that kind of, you will not see things like what you've seen in Britain with Brexit votes that you don't know where it's coming from. And so all that means that Portugal is today a very, very, very interesting country to do business, turn itself to the world with lots to offer, and which has finally found its position in the world. And that's the first part of the internationalization. I think the Irish found it when they realized that it could be a platform for American business in Europe. Mm-hmm. We found it when we realized that our hospitality and our links to Portuguese-speaking countries around the world open a reason why we can actually bring value to Europe, well, generally.
And what industries or sectors do you see particularly developing post-pandemic as technology, which the Portuguese are amazingly good at, it gets even more prevalent in our lives, but also the need to escape and the need to have leisure time and to enjoy a lifestyle? So if you take those two together, I mean, my perspective would be that you would be growing in both hospitality and technology. But are there other emerging industries that you think will also particularly suit the Portuguese mentality and way of doing business?
I think industry is finding a comeback. So for example, all the industry that is related to call centers, all that kind of stuff. For example, offshoring of technical stuff is coming in very strongly. I mean, several banks are actually putting back a lot of their back office operations in Portugal, right? For example, just an example, BNP Paribas has actually brought in lots of its onshored a lot of its operations in Portugal, and many other banks are doing similar stuff. I think so. So in terms of services, so again, tourism and hospitality will be critical. Coming back to your points, and related industries. So talking about education, health, a mixture of health and lifestyle, a mixture of education, lifestyle, all these industries, that's going to be one important cluster. A second important cluster is going to be the cluster of offshoring, call centers, onshoring, all those kinds of services that are support to the large companies. You can actually base them in Portugal, and that's a huge potential there. And some companies are actually leveraging our resources to actually go beyond this and do innovation. So Mercedes, for example, has just set up a center to do its software development for everything that is not car related in Portugal. On our campus, we have Schroeder. Schroeder is the largest producer. Sorry, my throat is dry.
Go ahead.
Schroeder is the largest producer of public lighting in the world, and they've actually set up their research center, which is looking at new applications to manage smart cities, not just in Portugal but in our campus. right? And so all these companies that are doing innovation find Portugal a great place to be. Why? Because you're bringing together the three things. First, if you want to have the researchers here, the international researchers, it's a great place to live. Second, and it's inexpensive, you have technology. Second, you have the technology. Third, they have the infrastructure. And so all these things that leverage these two pillars, again, the infrastructure, the human resources, the lifestyle, all industries that leverage these things are going to be the ones that are going to be here. As I mentioned to you, onshoring is going to be very important. Tourism will be very important and everything related to it. And I think even innovation, there's a potential to bring some of that stuff here.
And one of the things that I know must cause quite a bit of angst and hurt and discussion, even though I'm not aware of it, is that you're still a relatively low-wage economy 5 years after we've arrived there. And I know that the base salary does go up annually. But compared to the wage inflation that Ireland, for example, saw as a result of its growth, do you think that the Portuguese economy is set to maintain that low-wage base, or do you think it will rapidly increase the way it did in Ireland, and which has caused its own problems in Ireland?
No, but you see, I think wage inflation, growth of wages, is basically a consequence of economic growth. I mean, when you grow, you become more productive. When you become more productive, wages are likely to go up. You don't want them to go up very fast, but you want them to go up because that means that people are living better. So the key question is, do we find any evidence in Portugal that you get an acceleration of wages that is much faster than productivity is? We've had rises in the minimum wage over the last few years. So there is some reason for concern, but I think the government here is very pragmatic and will not allow, and we have no history in the past of allowing wages to go up too fast and hinder our competitiveness in that way. The population is getting very much more educated. The schools are changing themselves. Universities are changing themselves. We're very much focused on giving these students a lot of new skills towards the future. And so I think we're going to be able to increase our resource base in a way that will allow us to keep on growing without having wages pick up too fast. That's my sense.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things is you mentioned onshoring here, and as a university, obviously, collaboration with enterprise is a key. I mean, I know most universities view their collaborations with enterprise as being a fundamental part of their revenue streams and also the innovation that goes on. What's your view in Nova about your collaborations? You mentioned, I've forgotten the name also. Shredder.
Oh,
so do you promote those actively?
For us, it's the core. And I mean, I'm glad I have a chance to actually also bring this up, as we have many people, business people from Ireland watching this. You know, I really think that when you think of our project, our growth, our campus, behind this lies this fundamental concept that universities need to change. Whatever we were for the last 200 years. I tend to play and say we have a structure that is 200 years old, faculty that is from the last century, and students that are from the new century. And so there's a disconnect here. And at the same time, we see a world which is just, you know, go home and turn on the TV and you'll find stuff is happening that we don't know why it's happening. Elections that go in ways that we don't expect. Events that all of a sudden things happening and we don't understand why they're happening. And that means that we live in a world which is changing very fast. And that change requires that our institutions, universities included, change to accompany it. And hopefully, because if you change, that change may not be that positive, in the sense that, you know, that change, if we don't adjust to it, change may take us into dark places. And so as a university, we need to change, and we need to change fast. We need to change for two reasons. First, from a competitive standpoint, because we need to go with the times. Second, because from a social responsibility point, we are a place where we think about the future. And we're seeing a future awakening that has some dark spots. So we need to find new solutions and prevent those dark spots from appearing. And so universities need to change. Again, they need to change because they need to remain competitive. They need to change because the world needs us to change to find out new solutions. So for us, this means three things very basically. This means that the kind of skills that we need to develop in our students need to change. And we are making that leap forward. For example, at some level, we're bringing in more technology. For example, we teach business, but we now teach technology as well. We teach data science. We teach a lot of technology-intensive courses. Right? So we're trying to bring that matching of new skills that management, technology, and the soft skills as well. So for example, we see companies, what they ask us from our students, we want courage, collaboration, communication, creativity, right? We want all these C's, and I say, oh, but my teachers are not equipped to teach these things to students. So we need to get students new ways of learning. Entrepreneurship is critical. When you run a project, you learn about it. You learn about being creative. You learn about being courageous. You learn about collaborating, right? And so we are changing the skills that we deliver to students, and we're changing this by bringing more technology in and by bringing entrepreneurship to the core. We're also changing the way we interact with companies, and now I go straight to your question, which is we need to be a partner with companies. For example, in this school, the way we built this campus is through a massive fundraising campaign where we have collected 50 million euros from companies. They funded this campus. And so we need to give back to them. And we give back to them by creating an ecosystem of innovation on our campus. So Shredder is here, but Ageas also has a lab here that develops new ideas for their business. And when we do this, our students that participate in these ventures learn, they get those skills that I was just mentioning before. And these companies benefit because the innovation that happens on campus has the benefit of using the youth as a powerhouse of creativity. If you want to think about the future, don't take 70-year-olds, take 20-year-olds, right? And so the second dimension of our change is to be open, not just to work with companies, but to bring companies onto our campus. We want them to be here because we want the students during their break to speak to these people when they're lining up for lunch, right? And so we want a campus that is very open. If you come to visit this campus, you'll realize that outside of COVID times, you don't even need to have a card to come in. There's no security. You walk in, you walk around, you can speak to students, because we want to create an open campus. Companies will be here, and we're trying to expand it. We want more and more companies to come and base themselves on our campus, develop their innovation on our campus, work with startups on our campus. Okay? The third dimension of what we're trying to do, again, on this focus on becoming more competitive towards the future and changing our social responsibility, is understanding that the world is moving into the purpose and impact stage. Everybody, all organizations, and we're going to come back to the beginning of our conversation, need to find their purpose. And need to show that the impact that they have is aligned with that purpose. And so, for example, right now, we are developing a new platform that basically everything we do is going to be measured against the Sustainable Development Goals. Right? We're launching new masters. Everything is how much and how are we contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, looking towards the future, this is what we're doing. You're working with individuals to change the way the skills that we deliver. We're working with companies to create a big ecosystem of innovation on campus where students learn and companies benefit because they get their ideas to prepare themselves for the future. And we're changing the way we measure our impact by aligning ourselves with the SDGs. And this means, from my perspective, 20 years down the road, and I think this is a change that many universities will have to do. This means that from my perspective, 20 years down the road, we're going to have universities that are very different from the ones of 200 years ago, where no longer you have teachers speaking, students listening, and exams being done, but you learn 24 hours a day, and you learn in a very, how should I put it, in a very non-formal way. It's not a great word, but it's a very non-formal way by just interacting and being exposed to things and leading projects and creating impact. And that's our dream here. That's why we built this campus. That is the change we're trying to make in this school. When we bring Shredder to campus, when we bring Ageas to campus, when we bring all these new masters, when we allow students to form clubs. For example, it's very important. We want students to form clubs. And one thing that we're doing now is that whenever students engage in those activities, we try to measure the skills they learn, and we give them credit for the skills they learn when they engage in those kinds of things. Because we believe that whenever they start a club, they're actually learning, and so we want to make sure that we certify that learning as well. And those are the kinds of changes that we're trying to do here. And we do it with the companies. We do it because we only make sense if we're useful for the impact we create, but also for the companies that are with us on this journey.
Fascinating.
It's a lot of change that we try to create here, but it's exciting and it's fun, and we see the change happening, and we're happy with the way it's going, and we see the students very much motivated with this.
Mm-hmm. No, I think certainly all around the world we've seen a huge amount of enterprise move into universities, and your underpinning of it with the SDGs is very ethical and moral approach to it, which we may not have seen in some places where enterprise has gone into universities and the results have been really quite awful. The hijacking of academia by enterprise and science in particular, probably not to the same extent in the business world. How would you protect yourself and the ethos that you hold dear in the face or in the onslaught of enterprise engagement with universities?
That's a very, very good question. That's a very, very good question. And it's something that, for example, just now we've had some trouble with some Portuguese media and some people, for example, they're very suspicious of business, so they look at this and they say this doesn't make sense, this is too corrupt. And I think we are learning through it. We've had a good experience so far, but I think even now, for example, we're working with professors from other schools to actually think of how it is that our model can coexist with the same academic independence that we've seen that is critical. So that's something that is from the last 200 years that we don't want to change. Because if we do it, then we're going to be hurting ourselves. I mean, we have to be engines. We're not engines of marketing for companies. We are engines of creation, of new solutions, of new ideas, of transformation. Companies now are looking for it. So if you want to do that on our campus, wonderful. But if all you want to do is position yourself and control power and control knowledge, then obviously there's a question there. How we do it, we'll be learning through it. We see our organization as very much into learning. So we don't pretend to have all the answers. I never pretend to have all the answers. But I know that at the speed that the world is changing, we cannot wait to have all the answers. We need to dive, learn to swim, trial and error, bootstrapping, but keep resilient. Understand your principles. Don't strive from them, but stay optimistic and understand that you're learning. You're learning all the time.
I think we're starting to run out of water here, Arnold. So
I know. I'm okay. It's just a problem when you teach. You always speak too loud. So I've had that problem. I speak a bit too loud, especially when it's exciting. And so we had one case on the 12th of March. I was at home. It was till the 12th of March. I was home. We had made some contingency plans that someone had put them somewhere. And I found out about it at 10 p.m. and at 11:30 p.m. I took the decision of closing the school and we were going to move everything online. And we moved everything online in 3 days. Right. And so what are the things that we learned from that perspective? The first one is communication is critical in crisis. Mm-hmm. One thing that students really value is that I wrote to them an email every day on what was happening, what was not happening, what were the decisions that were being taken. And so that was very, very important. And communication and transparency was critical. The other thing that I also learned that was very important is when there's too much unpredictability, you cannot allow it to happen. So take decisions. Do your worst case scenario and just take decisions and allow people to get organized. So for example, it was very important that we very quickly said, okay, we're going to be digital all the way to the end, and it allowed all our foreign students to go home and knowing that they didn't have to come back and not have to worry about it. And I think that the third element was actually to provide a lot of support to students. So we actually created a team that was calling students on a daily basis and finding out all those ones that needed to get supported. We actually spent quite a bit of time supporting. So this was the early phase. The second phase was, of course, how do you prepare? And we were very afraid because we got a lot of international students. So we were worried about how to make sure that they come. And three things were important there. The first one, again, committing to learning. One thing we've learned from COVID is digital will not replace presential learning. Learning is a human experience. Yeah. You can do some of it online. You cannot do it all online. So we've made a clear decision. Digital matters, but it's going to be complementary to online. We made that decision early. We realized it. We made that decision early. So we started, but at the same time, we realized that digital was going to become much more important than before. So you won't replace presential, but it will become much more important than before. We knew that this was happening. So what we used this was to accelerate some of this change. And so for example, right now, we have some of our courses are taught, some classes are taught digitally. So the faculty, when it has to teach theory, does it digitally. And then we have to actually get discussions, they go in class and they do it in class. So that's a big part of the movement that we've done, is that the blended model I mean, there was a big discussion. Are you going to have presential learning? Are you going to have digital learning? Are you going to have blended model? Clearly, the blended model is the future, and we've accelerated that. Because one of the interesting things is that university, especially faculty, is very resistant to change. So we found if we actually tried to make this move in a context where there was no accelerator, it wouldn't have worked. So we used COVID to accelerate this movement towards blended and reduce the barriers to change that we would find inside the organization. And the third element was very important, is just on preparedness. And we've had to really, I was talking about managed chaos before, and when you get a very innovative organization, you want to get that sort of buzz. But when you're dealing with COVID, you need to get prepared. You cannot just come up with solutions last minute. And so we've actually had quite a bit of effort in terms of preparing ourselves, and I think that has taught us quite a lot on managing and preparing for crisis where the change is coming. So if I look at long term, I think we've accelerated transition to a blended model. We know that we're not going to be full digital, and we've become much better at getting prepared, and I think that's very important. And we found out that in the end, in a crisis, confidence is key. People that are with you need to trust you, and that's the first thing that you need to be concerned about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is to try to find a right balance, I would say. Now another question which I think you have actually answered or gone through during your conversation is from Pedro. On a competitive university market in Portugal and internationally, what is the differentiation and added value of Nova?
Of Nova?
Yeah.
I think in Portugal, we are a gateway to the world. We like to think of ourselves. So Portuguese students that come here, they come here because we teach everything in English. 56% of our master's students are international, of which 30% are actually German. We have international companies. McKinsey, for example, comes from Germany. Adidas comes from Germany. Beiersdorf comes from Germany. We have all the investment banks coming from London to our campus to recruit students here. So in a sense, when you come to Nova open yourself towards the world, and this is what we do. Our master's programs, our master in management is ranked top 16 in the world. Our master in finance is number 12 in the world, right? And we compare to top schools from any other country in Europe. So all these means that a Portuguese student or any European student or any student in the world knows that coming to Nova is like getting on, I call it travel without moving. It's opening up to the potential to find out yourself, find out about other cultures, find out about other people, and get the skills and the network that put you on an international career. And I would love to have more students coming from Ireland to do this, and having also more companies from Ireland looking to recruit our students. We get quite a few. For example, I mean, we always place quite a few students going to Google in Ireland. So we get quite a few students going to Ireland. But this is, for example, one link that would be quite interesting to try to explore how we can actually increase the flow of our students to go work in Ireland.
Okay. Well, actually, I mean, on that, Pedro is also saying that Nova is great on partnership. And he was asking if there is any plan for university, small and medium-sized enterprise companies cooperation programs, which would be.
No, absolutely. I think we do quite a few programs. For example, our executive education arm does quite a few programs with small and medium-sized enterprises. But for example, we have some projects with SMEs doing consulting labs. So what does it mean? For example, SMEs that want to grow, want to develop, they come to us and we get teams of students that do their thesis, setting up strategic plans, looking at new markets, or medium-sized companies that want to go international and want to start exporting. We do some of that work for them. So yeah, that's something that we right now we run quite a bit of programs, and we actually have we can put the contacts afterwards, but you just have to contact us and we'll line them up to do some of these partnerships.
Okay, excellent. And then we have actually in our audience the Irish ambassador to Portugal, who is asking you, Professor Traça, do you see particular opportunities for Ireland and Portugal to collaborate in post-Brexit context?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is something we didn't touch upon, which is critical. I think what we do between Ireland and Portugal is too little. I mean, there's a lot of stuff being done between the UK and Portugal. I don't understand why there's not more happening between Ireland and Portugal. And now that Brexit is actually making it more difficult to deal with, to have deals with Britain, I think Ireland is a tremendous gateway. Ireland can actually connect Portugal. Between Ireland and Portugal, for example, if you link it to the Portuguese-speaking countries, this is one way where we can actually work in partnership with Irish companies to go into those markets. Ireland can be a great partner to help us in the UK, in the US market, for example. Yeah. Right? And so we are two small countries, so I don't think that Irish are going to come to Portugal for the Portuguese market, or that the Portuguese are going to go to Ireland for the Irish market. But we are two countries that have a huge potential internationally, and we can help each other and form partnerships that allow us together to go around the world. And I think that's a lot of potential that exists to happen there. And also in terms of resources, in terms of point of view of students going back and forth, all these are links that I think we should work harder to establish.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a question of, going into a protocol with the University of Nova and the IPBN. So I
absolutely,
think
we've been talking about some of the things. I met your ambassador at another event, and we've been talking about trying to create more of these links. And I do think that there's one critical important thing, which is the point I mentioned. I think the Irish success in transforming the education miracle into a growth miracle is something that Portugal has a lot to learn from. I keep on doing this. I'd love at some point just to organize something with the government here for them to understand how. I know there's the partnership with ICEP. I think there would be interesting also that ICEP understands how you set these things up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then I have a question from Susan. I mean, that's the question I think everybody would want to have an answer is, what to expect, when do you feel there will be an economic recovery, not because of the state support, but because of the investor mentality of doing it?
I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist. I think things are going to be, we're going to go through a very difficult period. I mean, for example, in Portugal, for example, when we stop these government support, the moratorium and all that kind of things, you're going to see lots of hardship. But I do think that COVID will go away relatively. Let me put it like this. I think this is a question that the best people to answer are not the economists, are the virologists. When the virus goes away, assuming that it doesn't stay with us for years, and I don't think that scenario is around, when the virus goes away, if it goes away until, let's say, next summer, I think the economy will pick up stronger, quite strongly. I think we'll all, on our mindset, we'll realize it's over and we'll all want to come back. And if that's the case, I don't think the recovery will linger for too long. If the virus stays for very long, and I don't think it's the main scenario, then we can have problems. But I think we'll recover from this crisis much faster, much, much faster than we recovered from the 2008 crisis. I clearly think, I really believe so.
Okay, all right, very good. So I'm now going to ask Mario, let's hope that works, to ask his question directly to you. So Mario, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Aoife, Professor Daniel, and everyone else at home. Thank you very much for sharing this conversation. It was really interesting. So let me jump right into the question. While the state budget was only delivered yesterday and it's still going to be discussed, some measures have already been debated in the press for a few weeks now. Some news call it a social budget, highlighting the strong focus of social policies and, in some way, the lack of measures to help private companies face this crisis. So I would like to know your opinion about it, and what do you think is the potential impact of this budget to Portugal's economic landscape, and in particular to public universities? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'll have a hard time answering to this because I have not seen the budget. And so it's a difficult question to answer. I would say that it is very important that policy these days understands the social trouble we're in. But remember, we have a strategy. we have a strategy for Portugal called the 2030 strategy. It's a strategy that has clear goals for the development and transformation of the country from here for the next 10 years. So I think that the budget must look at the hardship that we're looking at today and must be very active in this, but also must be committed to the success of the strategy that we have put in place. And a strategy that a country commits to cannot just be a matter of spending money coming from Europe. A strategy is something that a country commits itself wholeheartedly for the next 10 years. So the time to start actually committing to that strategy is today with this budget. And so I haven't seen it, but one thing I'll judge the budget against is how much is it committing to the strategy that we have put in place for the next 10 years. This said, it's very important to realize the times are very difficult for lots of people, and so the budget needs also to make sure that we support those that are in need in the situation that we're living in.
Okay, all right. So I don't have any more questions on the chat. I don't know if anybody in the audience would like to ask a question directly. Just wave if you want. Otherwise, I think we will finish there. Aoife, if you want to say maybe a conclusion.
Well, obviously, I'd like to thank Professor Traça.
Thank you.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I really do think that we will keep in much closer contact over the coming months and years to build a relationship between Ireland and Portugal. I think there's a lot our two countries have to offer each other, and I would love to see and hear more about the Nova success story as it continues to grow over the next
maybe we
few
can
years.
create a strong relationship between Nova and Ireland as well.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
something that we're committed to.
Thank you all for listening to us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. The video will be available afterwards to share on YouTube and on our website. And do join us for the next event in November. Thank you.
School, a community of world citizens dedicated to the development of talent and knowledge that impacts the world. A school of business and economics with a fundamental role to play, supporting those who strive to be better, people, professionals, leaders, driven by insight and enterprise. At our home in Carcavelos. A top-ranked international school offering innovative and excellent pre-experience programs, bachelor's in economics and bachelor's in management, for a life-transforming experience with curriculum-enhancing activities and integration of technology advancements and digital ubiquity, master's in economics, finance, management, and business analytics, ranked by the Financial Times and EdUniversal, with 100% of our graduates working within 6 months of graduation. We are widening our horizons. Together, we are a Nova School for the future.